Hello there, this is James S. Croft, he knows 1978, and watching the 2012 movie Lincoln last night, aside from believing that it should have ended around half an hour earlier and been called the 13th Amendment, because after all, that was the heart of the story, but of course, even back then, it was Lincoln who was portrayed as being at the centre of the issue, and the divine saviour who freed the slaves with his bare hands. The one thing that struck me more than anything else was that although this film is a dramatisation, and therefore as reliable a historical resource as any random YouTube video, if any of its depiction of the arguments made against abolishing slavery were even remotely accurate, then it is yet another example of how the more things change, the more they stay the same. That the cycle of activism, progress, and reactionary I'm Not Bigoted but has indeed been repeating itself ad nauseum for centuries, for the sole reason that, as I explain in the video links down in the underbar, too many of us still labour under the arrogant conceit that there is a natural order, that society is already more or less equal, and so achieving equality is merely a matter of members of the dominant social group deciding how many rights and how much equality to give to the people who we believe deserve it because they ask nicely, like Oliver Twist. With the regressive and reactionary I'm Not Bigoted buts often sincerely believing that they are the ones fighting for freedom because anyone who denies their right, in inverted commas, to oppress and discriminate against others is a tyrant and a dictator, and even when this is not the case, opposing and condemning any and all perceived threats to the status quo for fear that it will put us all on a slippery slope that will ultimately lead to the destruction of society. Ooh. Indeed, aside from the scene which I believe should have been the climax of the entire film, with Tommy Lee Jones' character in bed with his not-wife, quietly celebrating the fact that after so many decades and so much struggle, they had finally taken another tiny baby step towards equality, the two scenes which genuinely stand out for me in this movie were, first of all, the moderate centrist, not collaborator Honest, who despises slavery, but giving his speech asking that if they free the slaves today, then what comes next? Votes for Negroes? Or even worse, votes for women? And secondly, the scene in which Tommy Lee Jones' character, who had, quote, led the battle for race equality for 30 years, declares repeatedly in front of the House of Representatives that he only believes in equality before the law because he knows that the anti-abolitionists have set a trap for him, that they've brought in every newspaperman from Louisville to San Francisco to report on what he says, knowing that any talk of true racial equality, of how black people are no different from whites, and that there should even be a black president someday, will kill any support for the abolition of slavery stone dead. And at the end of that scene, the swelling music proudly declares that by disavowing everything that he has ever fought for and believed in, effectively declaring that yes, Negroes are naturally inferior and can never be respected as equals, but he has achieved a heroic and historic victory because by not frightening the white boys, he has helped to guarantee that the amendment will indeed be passed. And especially now in the 21st century, when solely to maintain our own privilege and power, we have decreed that everyone is equal now and oppression and discrimination only occur in bad societies that we hate, so shut up, as the election of Donald Trump for the sole reason that in their minds a Muslim Negro and a conniving lesbian were allowing immigrants and globalists to ruin America serves to demonstrate in spades the sole basis of any and all opposition to any and all progress, either real or imagined, remains the delicate feelings of insecure white boys and their token supporters. Meaning that today, just as it was when anti-abolitionists fearmongered against the 13th Amendment, condemning it as a part of the evil conspiracy to, quote, niggify America and put the black race on high, the $64,000 question for all progressives remains the paradox of how to achieve any kind of progress without frightening the white boys and thus causing them to enable, support and even openly become fascists while crying that it's the leftists' fault for hurting their delicate feelings. of how to say that no, society needs to change because it's society that's the problem, and no, being less or even the least bigoted, oppressive and discriminatory compared to countries that literally torture and murder people en masse is not good enough, when even the prospect of a poo being written out of The Simpsons, a series about which, by the way, no one, least of all the creators, has given a flying fig since the turn of the millennium, causes them to fly into a white-hot pants-shitting rage, screaming about Big Brother 1984 and no doubt, of course, hashtag white genocide. Not because, as they scream from the rooftops for the entire internet to hear, it's another step on the slippery slope towards a fascist, commie, Jewish, atheist, Muslim, feminazi, leftist SJW tyranny, since no matter how sincerely they may believe this, it's merely a rationalization, a construct which they build to justify their entirely self-serving and irrational discomfort and fear, but because instead, as this reactionary cartoon depicting the leftist future of America ironically demonstrates, being the pathetic, spoiled and selfish little snowflakes who they are, who were raised to believe that the entire world would revolve around them, other people merely existing and doing things that annoy them, frighten them, or otherwise hurts their delicate feelings is honestly the greatest threat that they have ever faced. Literally voting for Trump and the Republicans for no other reason than because Hillary called them deplorable and the boogeyman of regressive leftism is supposedly ruining their precious comics and video games. And in the next video in this series, I'll explore the underlying irrational terror which is the root basis of their self-victimizing martyr complex, as well as their perpetual addiction to outrage.